It begins in a moment you don't even notice. Someone disrespects you. Someone questions you. Someone twists your words, misreads your silence, provokes you, pokes you, dares you to react. And what do most people do? They explain, they argue, they defend, they beg to be understood. But not the wise. The wise remain still. Because silence is not weakness, it's mastery. It's the weapon of those who no longer need to prove themselves. It's the shield of those who understand that not every battle is worth fighting, and that truth doesn't scream, it stands alone. Plato once said, "Wise men speak because they have something to say, fools because they have to say something." But what if the greatest wisdom is to say nothing at all in a world obsessed with noise, opinions, reactions, outrage? Silence is rebellion, and it terrifies people. Because silence does what no scream can. It reflects, it reveals, it exposes. In Stoic philosophy, silence is a form of inner discipline, apatheia, freedom from being enslaved by passions, especially the passion to always respond. Epictetus taught that people are disturbed not by things but by their judgments about things. And when you respond to insult, you accept the insult's power, you validate it. But silence says, "You are not worth my energy." We live in a reactive culture. Social media has trained us to respond within seconds. Comments, replies, likes, rage. But every time you react, you reveal your emotional buttons. You show people what triggers you, what moves you, what shakes your ground. And some people, they feed on that. They thrive on seeing you lose control. But silence starves their need. It turns your absence into mystery. It turns your restraint into fear. When you don't explain, they start wondering. They panic. They fill in the blanks with their own insecurities. They invent reasons. And that's where the true power lies, not in telling your truth, but in letting them drown in theirs. You see, most people don't want to understand you. They want to control your narrative. They bait you with lies, twist your story, then wait for your defense so they can call you defensive. It's a trap. They don't want the truth, they want a reaction. So when you stay silent, you do what they fear most. You take away their control. And the world has no defense against a man who doesn't flinch. Let's be honest, silence is hard. Your ego screams, say something, defend yourself, don't let them win. But every time you react from ego, you lose spiritual ground. You descend to their level. True strength isn't about dominance, it's about restraint. The wolf doesn't bark when the sheep accuse him. He doesn't need to. He knows what he is. Plato believed that the soul is divided into three parts: reason, spirit, and appetite. When you remain silent in the face of insult, your reason rules over your appetite. You choose dignity over drama. You rise above. Sometimes silence is not about others. Sometimes it's about healing. When you're hurt, betrayed, abandoned, the urge is to talk, to vent, to cry out, to make someone understand. But the deeper work happens in quiet. In the stillness, you hear your soul whispering what no one else can tell you. You begin to understand not just what happened, but what it revealed. About them, about you, about the patterns you've been repeating. Words can distract, noise can numb. But silence makes you face yourself. And only there, in that painful clarity, does true growth begin. People fear what they can't read. When you speak constantly, you become predictable. When you over-explain, you become exposed. But when you go silent, truly silent, you become a mirror. People don't see you, they see themselves. Your silence forces others to reflect on their own guilt, confusion, or insecurity. You say nothing, but they feel everything. In many traditions, masculine energy is rooted in presence and stillness. It's the mountain that doesn't move when the wind howls. Modern men are taught to chase, to explain, to validate, to prove their emotions are real. But a truly grounded man doesn't need to chase anything. He doesn't need to explain himself to those who already chose to misunderstand him. He understands this timeless law. You owe no explanation to anyone who wasn't willing to understand you in silence. You can argue and still be weak. You can shout and still be insecure. You can win the fight and lose yourself. But when you master silence, you win everything. Because silence means you don't need their validation. You don't need revenge. You don't need to be understood. You only need your own peace. Carl Jung believed that what we reject in others often mirrors what we haven't faced in ourselves. So when someone is silent with you, it unnerves you. Why? Because you're left alone with yourself. And that's the hardest thing to face. People call silent men cold, arrogant, or emotionless. But in truth, most of them are simply unbothered. Because silence means you've already had the conversation with yourself. And you've already made peace with your truth. Some people don't deserve your story. Not because it's not worth telling, but because they're not ready to hear it. So you remain silent, not as an insult, but as protection. Some people will never understand your silence because they've never understood their own noise. Here's the twist. You don't need to raise your voice to be heard by the right people. The right people feel your energy. They read your silence like a book. They don't ask you to explain your pain. They respect it because they too have walked through the storm quietly. They know that those who talk the most often hide the least. And those who have been silent the longest carry the deepest truths. Once you master the art of silence, something magical happens. Insults bounce off you. Manipulators can't control you. Your enemies become confused. Your presence becomes power. You're no longer dancing to their music. You're writing your own symphony. And every second of your silence plays louder than their loudest scream. In the end, the greatest battles are not with others. They're with your own need to be heard, to be right, to be validated. But the moment you stop explaining, you start ascending. You become the quiet storm they never saw coming, the still water that runs deep, the unmoved mountain that watches empires rise and fall. You don't argue. You don't beg. You don't react. You simply stand. And in that silence, you say everything. So if you've been misunderstood, betrayed, mocked, or lied about, don't rush to defend yourself. Let the noise pass. Let the shadows dance. You stay silent because you've already won. If this message hit your soul, don't scroll away. Like this video, share it with a friend who's tired of shouting into empty rooms. And subscribe for more truth, more power, and more inner freedom. This is Phyllis Inc., where silence speaks.